Who are we going to blame for the Rangers dropping 4 in a row for the third time this season? Let's talk about Tuesday night's 2-1 loss to Winnipeg, and we got to get some answers with Jim Cerny of the Forever Blueshirts. Jim, long time, my friend. How you feeling?
I'm doing well, Brandon. How are you, man?
I'm doing better than the Rangers, I can tell you that. All right, let's get straight into last night's game because they had a big chance to stop the bleeding and get a much-needed win against the NHL's best team, but they couldn't get it done. Peter Laviolette said after the game, we need wins, we need points. It's frustrating for sure. So, Jim, what was so frustrating about Tuesday night's loss?
Well, I think the most frustrating part is not that you lost to the best team in the NHL in the Winnipeg Jets to start off a 3-game road trip. I think the most frustrating part was that they played really well through stretches, but yet some of the same issues that have confounded them all season reared their ugly heads. And, you know, you're counting on Igor Shesterkin again to stand on his head because he's facing one breakaway after another. But the most frustrating part is they played well enough to win this game. And listen, you know, they hit a couple posts and, you know, you had a controversial goalie interference of the goaltender penalty against Matt Rempe, and then Winnipeg scores on that power play. So, yeah, a lot of frustration because they played so much better collectively than they did over the weekend in those losses to Ottawa and Columbus. But at the end of the day, Peter Laviolette will be the first to tell you right now, it's all about the points. There are no consolation prizes or moral victories right now. You need 2 points every night, and they got 0.
I'm glad you mentioned Igor facing breakaway after breakaway because according to Natural Stat Trick, last night they had at least 3 breakaways allowed and a total of 17 high danger scoring chances. And as you know, a sloppy transition led to the Jets' opening goal. So it's too late in the season with a lot on the line for sloppy defenses. So what's going on with the blue line? How does this defense get better?
So here's the thing. First of all, it's not just the defensemen, though, of course, they take their fair share of the blame here. But it's the 5-man unit, really, you know, with the Rangers defensively. And I wrote a couple stories about this earlier in the week. This is their DNA. This is who they are. Even though they brought in some new defensemen, some new players, you know, Chris Drury shaking up the roster over the course of the season, it's been the same thing over and over and over. These defensive breakdowns are just are galling, appalling and galling, right? Igor faced 3 breakaways, clear breakaways, including one that was 1 minute after the go-ahead goal where Winnipeg took a 2-1 lead there in the second period. That was a massive save at the time. Nemetsnikov gets in behind Zach Jones, who was skating like he didn't even know that there was somebody flying by him. And I mean flying by him. Jones ended up nowhere in the same zip code as him, as Nemetsnikov broke in against Igor. Igor made the save, and he stopped all 3 of those breakaways, kept them in the game, kept it a 1-goal game. But these breakdowns are just, it's game in, game out, and it's not just the defensemen. It's laissez-faire forwards coming back into, you know, taking their time, coming back to the zone, losing their men. Man, do they lose the middle of the ice more than any team I've seen, any good team, because they're good. There's talent here. But more than any good team that I can remember in, you know, certainly recent memory.
So you're saying things like they're good. There's talent there. You also mentioned how Chris Drury has made trade after trade to try and strengthen this roster. But then you also said that the same things continue to happen over and over. So who deserves more blame for how this season's played out so far? Peter Laviolette or Chris Drury?
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a great question because I don't think it's black and white. And you got to throw into the mix too the guys on the ice. As we said, you know, they've turned over a lot of the roster here and still the, you know, similar issues. You know, things are better now than they were back in November and December. I think Peter Laviolette's steady hand has played a role in that. You know, he has really kept the faith in struggling players like Vincent Trocheck, like Alexis Lafreniere, Mika Zibanejad, who really has turned his game around since the JT Miller trade. You know, and I think that that's benefited the team. But my biggest criticism of the coach is, boy, you know what's not working? Playing man-on-man defense in your own zone. Like the 5-on-5, I talked about, they're losing players, they're losing the middle of the ice, they're losing puck battles. That first goal that Winnipeg scored yesterday, and you talked about how it was a terrible transition. It was a terrible transition. But at the end of the day, there was one great camera angle where it shows the Rangers have all 5 guys back in the defensive zone. Winnipeg only had 3 guys over the blue line, breaking in offensively. Rangers had all 5 guys back. No one knew where to be. It was like, you remember the old Three Stooges where they turn around and they run into each other and everything? That's what it looked like. Like if you watch that camera angle from above, it looked like the Three Stooges, except there were 5 of them out there. And somehow Perfetti gets open space, is able to feed it in front, and Nemetsnikov still beats his man to the net. There are 5 Rangers defending, right? Yeah. But Nemetsnikov, not a big hulking guy like Brandon London, gets to the net anyway. And the puck goes off him, then it bounces off Sam Carrick and it's in the net, and boom, you're trailing 1-0. And that's just one example of so many, not just last night, but all season. So let me circle back to the man-on-man. To me, that's the biggest criticism, I think, of Peter Laviolette. You can also talk about not benching guys and, still doling out massive ice time to Vincent Trocheck when his production is way down, or Alexi Lafreniere or whatever. But to me, that's the biggest criticism of the coach. Who's more to blame? I think everybody shares in it equally here, including the players. But at the end of the day, too, remember, Chris Drury put this team together, and it's really his team now, with 6-7 trades during the course of this season. So I know I'm not giving you an answer. I'm giving you a non-answer answer by saying everyone's got to share in the blame. But really, to me, it's equal parts Peter Laviolette, Chris Drury, and certainly the players have to be held accountable.
You're in a safe place, Jim. Sound like you needed to get a lot off your chest just now, so it's all good with me. But I got to put you on the spot for this next question. They head on out to Minnesota next to face the Wild on Thursday. That's going to be a stretch of 8 consecutive games against teams currently in playoff position. The Rangers are 9-18-4 against postseason-bound opponents. 17 games left in the season, Jim. Plead your case on why they'll make it or why they won't make it to the playoffs.
Ooh, and another good question. So we've spoken when the Rangers were in their nadir of their season, November, December, when they won only 4 of 19 games. And I was telling you, even then, I thought the Rangers were going to make the playoffs. The roster, it's still a good roster. That's not a bad team. They have played badly, but I don't think it's a bad team, roster wise. So why do I think they can still make the playoffs? And I do. I think they can make the playoffs. They're still, despite all their follies, despite 4-15-0, despite the atrocious defensive breakdowns, pretty much on a game-by-game basis, where are they? They're 2 points out of a playoff spot against teams that have not made the playoffs in years, Columbus and Ottawa. Now, they just lost to each of those teams head-to-head, and to me, that was a big alarm for the Rangers. But at the end of the day, it's time for them to rely on their experience and bring it forward onto the ice. This is a team that made it to 2 of the past 3 Eastern Conference finals. They have the experience winning big games. They need to win big games down the stretch here. They haven't done it. I know the eye test is ugly, but they're right there. Despite all their follies, they didn't ever fall back 10 points out of a playoff spot. They've always been within striking distance. And I think if they're within striking distance, I lean on them to make it, because I really believe in crunch time in the goalie, in Igor Shesterkin, to be the difference maker against some of these other teams. I can make the argument, too, that they won't make it because they're not beating good teams, and their schedule down the stretch is really tough. They have not beaten the good teams all season long. I'll tell you an absolute must-win game. It's at the end of this 3-game road trip. They have the rematch against Columbus. They just had that putrid loss to the Blue Jackets on Sunday at the Garden. They absolutely must win that game and win it in regulation. Like, you can't win it in overtime and Columbus still gets a point. You need to lock that one down, close out the road trip with a big win in Columbus.
All right, Jim, if this wasn't Zoom, we'd hug it out here, man. Heck of a therapy session we just had. Thanks for hopping on with me, Jim.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime.